Hey everybody, welcome to Pro Shop Talk. I'm Daniel, I'm the technical director here at RW Supply and Design. And today we're talking about alternative stains, specifically talking about PALL-X 2-KOLORIT system. I had the privilege of interviewing RJ with PALL-X, and he gave me a lot of good information about this stain, and he's also really excited about it. I mean, PALL-X has been developing this for, sounds like, going on 10 years, so they put a lot of effort into this. Today, I get to use it, and I'm excited to see what it's like. According to him, some of those benefits that I'm gonna see are low VOC, little to no smell, certainly a lot safer health-wise. If I get it on my hands, it shouldn't absorb through my skin. Another exciting thing about this, according to RJ, is that this has got a guaranteed 5-hour dry time. It's, I believe, 12 hours for white, but all the other colors are guaranteed at 5 hours. So according to him, this is a lot more compatible with water-based finishes, water-based sealers, but this does not need a sealer. So at that 5-hour mark, we've only got 2 coats left. So if that's true, it's a significant time saving. This is apparently a really easy product to apply. I can put it down any way I want. RJ said he has not figured out a way to screw it up. I can rag on, rag off, pat on, rag off, roll on, rag off, buff on, whatever I want to do. So today I'm going to apply this a lot like I do magic oil. I'm going to trowel it onto the floor, buff it in, buff it off. And I'm going to see how that goes. I've never applied a stain quite like that, so it'll be interesting. Behind me, we've got my panel. My test panel is ready to go. I sanded it to 100 grit and I've water popped it. It's a 16 by 12 foot, kind of simulates a bedroom with a little built-in closet. Hopefully give me an idea of what this is like to put it down in a room of the house. Okay, let's go over the tools that I'm planning on using here. I've got my 2-KOLORIT, important, stain, plus the second component, also important. RJ did say if somehow you forget this, it just extends the drying time of this. PALL-X gives you a nice bucket to mix the product up in. I like that, comes with the 2-KOLORIT. I've got a spoon to mix with, got a mountain of rags. Probably gonna use those mostly to rag off the edges. I've got my gloves, because I don't wanna go home with black cuticles tonight. Then I'm gonna buff the product in with a red pad, and then I'll buff off and even out with the white pad. So I've just got one of each. I will be applying the product to the floor with a trowel. So I've got my wide bladed fan trowel, and I've used this to put down a lot of oil products. I really like using this kind of a trowel. These are a little bit polarizing. Some guys like this type of trowel, some guys don't. And finally, I always keep a piece of sandpaper with me, the same that I use to final the floor. Just in case I see any marks or anything as I'm going, I can hopefully wet sand those out. Crack this for the first time. Let's see. I'm going to mix up the entire can. Should be more than enough for this panel. And I'm going to take this. I'm not going to be very careful with that. I'm going to throw that over there. Again, I'm not going to be very careful with that either. Here we'll add our second component. So it says to add this and start mixing. Mix for about 60 seconds. I mean, right off the bat, it smells like magic oil. It's got a similar smell, which isn't very offensive at all. So I can certainly see that it's a low VOC. That seems to be true. It does pour out a lot thinner than magic oil. This almost, initial impressions are a thinner version of magic oil. We are going to try our best to mess this up. So I will set my spoon there. I'll rub my fingers off on the floor. Take that can lid. Looks like our can has dripped out a little bit over here. For those of you that have never troweled in oil, it's kind of weird, threw me for a loop the first couple times I did it, but just get that pool. And you're just gonna work this puddle across the whole floor. I find the edges are the hardest part to do. Okay, so I've left this area over here with all my errors. I mean, I'm gonna leave this sitting here for a bit. We're gonna see how it buffs out. I'm gonna start in that corner. I'm gonna buff the whole floor except for this. Then I'm gonna wipe my edges in, wipe my edges off, buff off. We'll see how it does. This is hopefully gonna massage the stain into the floor. I'm gonna go around, I'm just gonna make sure these edges are good and wiped in. And again, this feels a lot like putting down magic oil. Yep, I can just use a lot of the product that the buffer spit towards the wall. Got my edges rubbed in. Now, I think I'm just gonna go back and I'm gonna rag off all my edges real quick. I'm just gonna let these puddles and stuff sit as long as I possibly can. He did say just buff once with the red pad. Magic oil, I'm used to buffing twice or a couple times, but we're gonna take his recommendation, the one buff, and we're gonna start getting it off, smoothening it out with the white pad, and then we'll do this area last. Absorb up this puddle. Get that on my rag. All right, time to buff in this section and then do my final buff off. It does feel like my pad is getting a little bit loaded, so I'm going to take that off, flip it over. Make your final pass along the run, just in case. Sometimes you can see a weird wave going against the grain if you try to buff your way out sideways. I think that's it. Good to let it dry. Come back in a little bit, see what it looks like dry. One thing to mention with this, because it is an oil product, I just want to make sure and take my rags, anything that has the oil, outside, stretch it out until it's completely dry. I don't know how big of a risk of fire, but I'm sure there's some risk. I'm sure it's not zero. So I just want to be careful to get all this stuff out of the building and take it out. I'm sure if I had a bucket with water in it on the job, I could throw all this in there until I could get to that point. So, but I don't want to leave this in here. So it's the next morning and we're back on the panel. I really like the result overall. I think it's a good color. The application of it, I really like that. So we're gonna look at some intentional spots that I put in the floor and see how repairable it is. I do see sanding marks through the floor. I think that's just a result of my quick sanding of the panel. I probably should have bumped it up to 120, possibly stopped at 120 instead of 100 grit. But that seems to be more a feature of the color I picked for this than the actual stain itself. Other than that, I'm happy with the result. I did rub off a little bit of extra stain along this wall, so I've got a little bit of a halo effect. I don't think it would even be noticeable that much in a real world scenario. I left some purposeful drops right here, and then I left a heavy smear mark over here on purpose as well. I've got both 100 grit and 220. RJ said to touch up some spots, maybe just use 220 and put some extra stain on there. Then I've got my rags and a little bit of a pad to buff in extra stain. So let's see how our spots come out. Just put a little bit of that on and we'll see if it wipes out at all, reactivates. Interesting. I'm gonna wipe that on and see if letting it sit a minute allows it to reactivate. And if not, we'll use the 220 grit. Interestingly enough, this big drop I left, this is still wet this morning, so that didn't dry overnight. Let's just see if that comes out. Wow, so that came right out and it didn't dry. So maybe scrub that a little bit with some extra oil. Can still see that spot. So let's take RJ's advice. Let's do a little bit of 220. Let's kind of feather that 220 with the grain. Like RJ said, repairs are a little bit more art than science. So we'll try and feather this out with the grain there and try to work away any of our hard edges. Get some extra stain, and I'll let that extra stain penetrate that spot for 10 minutes or so while we try some other repairs. Let's see if this has re-emulsified at all. So those spots are still there, and we're going to try our 220 trick on those. I am just very lightly sanding. I am not putting any pressure at all on my hand. I'm going to let that sit for a little bit. Now let's take a look at this little halo I've got going on. This was technique. I just aggressively buffed that part out. So I'm just going to rub some of that in with the grain. I'm going to let that sit for a little bit as well. So I think with this, again, if it's anything like magic oil, it just needs a little bit of time to penetrate into the wood. I do see some sanding marks that got left in the floor. Again, super dark color. So I'm going to try, I don't know if this is correct or not, but I'm going to try the 100 that I finaled with. And we're going to try to do a little bit of wet sanding, see how well we can get rid of some of these sanding marks. And again, try to put some of that art to work and feather out my edges so I don't have a real defined stopped line. Same on the side. All right, so I got that sanded out. And same thing, let's let some oil penetrate for 10, 15 minutes, something like that. Let it sit on the floor. I'm gonna let the oil sit there for a little bit. I'm gonna move over to my heavy spot over here, see what I can do to take care of that. Here I left this intentional streak as if I didn't really wipe everything off with a rag, and I'm gonna see what it takes to take that out. I mean, I try the least aggressive thing first, so I am going to try just adding a little bit of oil to this and seeing how that re-emulsifies, if it does. So put that on there and I'll give it a good aggressive scrubbing. Yep. I'm just gonna let that sit there for a little bit. We'll see if that re-emulsifies. Okay, I've let this sit for 10 minutes or so. I'm just gonna scrub it off. I'm gonna see if my lines are still there. Yep, looks like those are still there. So doesn't look like this product re-emulsifies itself. 220 paper, we'll do what RJ said. We'll just go along here and lightly sand till those marks come out. Yep. There we go. Again, art, not science. So I'm just gonna try to feather my lines out. I don't wanna have a real defined line. I'll have to ask RJ, but I think the goal of using the 220 is just, you don't wanna like get down in and sand the grain of the wood too much. You just wanna get that heavy oil streaking off the top. Feather out into the main part of the floor. Again, hopefully that's gonna blend all that together. So let's do that. Come around this corner. I'm gonna let that sit for 10-15 minutes, just like I've let this other area sit. I'm just gonna start picking that oil up. And then working it off. Again, work around that. I think that looks pretty good and should dry. Sanding spot out. And again, probably just gonna start by blotting out some of this oil. And try not to get too aggressive on that. Even wipe it with my rag that has a little bit of oil on it so that I don't take up too much. I think that should dry good. Now we'll just start with this last spot. Blotting up. Area with the sanding marks came out really well. Looks good. I don't see any of my swirls in that spot, so that's good. Now I'm just gonna try this whole wall. We're gonna see what it's like to remove this halo if we can. And again, I think the problem is I wipe too aggressively with the terry. So let's try to not make that same mistake. And in order to not make that same mistake, I am gonna do a very light wiping in and out. Then mostly, I'm going to feather into my area. And get rid of my defined line there. Yeah, I think the repair's there. I mean, like RJ said, it is more art than science. It's not quite as easy as just rubbing product on, rubbing it off, but it's very similar to typical stain that you would use, oil solvent stain. So I wouldn't say it's any harder than that. I like those areas that I repaired. I think they're a little bit light and glossy right now, but based on how I saw the stain dry from last night to today, once this is dry, I would expect them to blend in real nicely with the floor. Just finished my test of 2-KOLORIT from Paulman. Overall, I really like the product. I mean, smell, there's little to none. It's about like putting down a natural oil like the magic oil. So I feel like I can put it down without getting too much up my nose. And the fact that RJ said this is safe to get on my hands or safer than an oil solvent stain, I really like that fact too. Application-wise, it was easy because I'm used to putting down an oil product. I could see a little bit of a learning curve for somebody who's not used to working in the product as much. RJ said, pick your method of putting it down. So the way I put it down, trowel on, buff in, buff off, I think would probably get you more mileage than rag on, rag off is my guess, but I'm not sure. I did have a couple of application errors. I mean, I think the biggest thing was just using terry cloth rags a little bit too aggressively on the edge when I wiped off. I probably should have finessed that just a little bit more, but overall the workability of the product was great. Repairability, little bit harder to repair than some of the other stains that re-emulsify themselves. So it did take a little bit more artistic sanding and also wiping and feathering, but again, it's no more difficult than standard oil solvent stains that are out on the market right now. So I wouldn't say it's any more difficult than those, and if you've repaired those, you should be fine. The other thing I really like about this is the guaranteed 5-hour dry time and the compatibility with water-based finishes. So I know in 5 hours, I can get back on and I can coat over this, except for the white. The white color is a 12-hour dry time, but I can get on this with water-based finish in 5 hours guaranteed. That dry time's a little bit longer than some of the other alternative stains I've tried. However, I only need to put 2 coats of poly over this because according to RJ, this is their best sealer as well. So instead of staining, putting down a coat of sealer, and then 2 coats of water-based finish, I can move straight to the 2 coats of water-based finish and be done. So I'm eliminating an entire coat by using this stuff. I would recommend this product. Obviously, anybody who uses Pollman and wants to use that complete system with Pollman, I think this is a great product for that. So you can have Pollman bottom to top. Anybody who uses water-based finishes and wants a guarantee that the water-based finish is going to be compatible and that this product or that the stain that they're using is going to be dry and they can use it within a certain amount of time. I would say as well, anybody who wants to eliminate that sealer coat and already has a system down where they're just putting down 2 coats of water base, this is going to help a lot in terms of giving you those seal properties without having to actually put down a sealer. This series has been a part of our larger series on alternative stains. I would invite you to check out those other videos. Please like, subscribe, and comment below if you have any questions.